They were the best of times. They were the worst of times. I wonder if in the future people will look back at this period of time that we're passing through and describe it in this way. Now you may agree for the worst of times description, but why the best? Well, you never know. What old things may die and what new things it may give birth to. Hello, and welcome once again to the second episode of the second season of the ThyGap podcast. Very happy to have you here with us again. My name is Bogus, and with me is my co-host who is absent. That's right, there is no being Brut. In this episode, it's just going to be a solo one. Good or bad, you decide. But yeah, so where is Brut? Brut's dead. Well, okay, no, he's not dead, but don't get too excited. But this much I can promise you, one day or the other, he's gonna go. And between the two of us, whoever goes first, I will make sure the other guy comes on here to mock the other one. You know, should be the ThyGap way. Well, now that it's just me and you for the first time, I guess it will be slightly different. I don't have anyone to bounce off of. In a way, I'm also relieved because Brut's presence, it really is taxing on you as an individual. But at the same time, a solo job is, it has its challenges as well. But anyways, I've got you for company, so let's see where this goes. Well, first of all, if you want to get in touch with us, if you want to reach out, if you want to let us know, hey, I'm the only guy in the world who's actually listening to your podcast, we'd appreciate that, because I guess there's about one or two people who check in. Well, I'm really just being humble because that's who we are. We're the humblest podcast in the world. But yeah, you can reach us out on at ThyGap on Twitter, at _ThyGap on Instagram, and Facebook. Well, who cares? Who really cares? Now, we also have an email address. It's mindthygap@gmail.com, mindthygap @gmail.com. I can spell it out completely now without Brut sitting on my head for that extra extension. But it's good for your clarity. Maybe you're not getting the spelling, and that's the reason why you were not writing in. Anyways, so those are our socials. That's how you can get in touch with us. The next thing that, if there was anything that I wanted to touch upon this season, from us to you, dear listeners, is you may have noticed in the first episode we didn't really bring up any parcel as we usually do at the end of an episode. We have this parcel section where we recommend some great pop culture stuff. It could be books, it could be movies, it could be TV shows, that, unmissable stuff that will really change the way you think or see the world, that will just either tickle your belly or it will really tickle your noodle, whichever way you like it. And yeah, we've decided that this season, at least, we're not going to do any more parcels. We're going to do away with parcels until we hear from any one of you saying, okay, you recommended this before, I checked it out, and here's why I liked it, or here's why I hated it, or I was indifferent to it, whatever. We just want to see if anyone has indeed checked any one of them out, because they're all bangers, as the kids you say these days. You should really try one of them. And there are many actually which you would find are quite relevant to these times that we live in. These trying, challenging times where you're filled with questions and you don't seem to find any answers, or you're too distracted and numb to even have any questions in the first place. You're sleepwalking through your day, and you're watching your goals and objectives go by as you procrastinate into a rut. If any of that touched home, probably these are good for you. Well, I could remind you of a few that we recommended last season. There was Dances with Wolves. There was Firefly, a TV show. There was Utopia, the British version, a TV show that aired on Channel 4. Then Blade Runner, the director's cut from Ridley Scott. Kingdom of Heaven, director's cut, Ridley Scott. And yeah, those are just a few to jog your memory. And those you would find still hold relevance to these times, especially. If any of you check them out and get back to us and give us your feedback, or just let us know how you thought, whether you liked it, whether you didn't. It just, that would be great to see, and that's the reason why we're going to do away with the parcel section until that happens. Also, we had resolved to cut down an episode's length to about 30 minutes because there was a lot of whining and bickering about this episode length. Well, so, all right, we respect our listeners, of course. So if that's the feedback we're getting, then that's what we're going to do. And what else? A stroke of irony for those who tuned in to the first episode of our second season, which if you tuned in without us even plugging it on our socials, really, you guys are the top dogs. You're the OGs. And if this thing takes off, man, it'll be taking off on your backs, the foundation that we laid on your backs with your faces pressed hard into the concrete and then steamrolled over on the great foundation. The foundation on the great structure that we built ThyGap on. And for that, we're eternally grateful. You will decompose down in the mud and you will be one with the earth. But that's how things should be. Au natural. So thank you for that, for tuning in. But if you did tune in, we talked about how Brut and I, we had certain goals, certain objectives for this new season. We wanted to experiment with a few things, try out a few new things this season, keep pushing the envelope, or so to say. But we couldn't. Why? Because, we took the excuse of COVID, 2020. And now we're having COVID-21, the pandemic and the stress and the depression and all of that stuff. We're just going to use that as an excuse because that's, that's our get out of free jail card that all of us have to use during these times. And we said anytime we fall, we aim for something and we fall, we get up again. That's what we do. We keep falling. We insist on falling. But we will get up again. And just as we said that and bid you farewell of the first episode, guess what happens? We missed last Thursday. We should have posted our second episode last Thursday, but we weren't able to. Why? Well, because COVID 2020 and now COVID-21. There's a new strain that's coming out from UK. There's a lot of stress going around, Yeah, we're going to use that excuse again. And why is Brut not part of this episode? Well, COVID-21. There's a new strain coming out of the UK. Didn't you know? Not that Brut caught the bug or anything, but it's it's much more sillier in comparison. And I could probably fill you in on what happened. Well, as you know, these are the lockdown times. These are the indoor times. These are the times of poor hygiene. And these are the times of piling on the pounds, so to speak. And, there's nothing really good going on a personal level. Even though we're living in our rooms, technically the room should be clean, but more or less a pigsty. There's no encouragement. There's no rainbows. There's no butterflies. There's no sparrows in the morning because all the pigeons have taken over. Very annoying. They keep shitting all over. I seem to have digressed. But coming back to Brut, speaking of shit, Brut was finding himself in a similar situation. He was down in a rut, because of COVID and the lockdown and all this stuff. And he really needed some excitement in his life. As you could have guessed from our previous podcasts, if there was an extrovert between myself and Brut, then it would be Brut. And he's not a guy you can keep trapped indoors for a very long time. That sort of thing tends to have interesting consequences for whoever's around him. For him, well, he doesn't really care. So yeah, that was getting to him, and he began scratching himself like he was having the, what do they call those? Like addicts. They get he started jonesing. He started jonesing for some activity. Well, I asked him, Brut, what's going on with you, man? Are you okay? Getting concerned. I mean, I look at myself in the mirror, and there's enough concern to carry over there. But then I look at you, and the added concern is not helping. And he was like, Bogus, you know how I am. I can't stay here for too long. I can't live like this for too long. I got to do something to get the adrenaline going. You know me. Yes, I said, yeah. And he said, they said it will be a few weeks. Then they said it will be a few months. Now a year has passed. Now again they're saying there could be no end in sight. Bogus. I cannot live like this. I need to do something. And I said, what? And he goes, I'm thinking I might just go rob a bank. And of course, I didn't laugh because I'm used to Brut's quote-unquote jokes by now, and I'm sure so are you on this podcast. So I just gave him a look and said, yeah, okay, but what are you really trying to do? I said, no, yeah, I'm going to rob a bank. And I could see he was serious. And I was like, Brut, you may have skills, you may have some talents here and there, and begrudgingly I'm admitting it now, but this is not your cup of tea, Brut. Robbing a bank all by yourself. Nah. And for those of you who have not seen Brut, which is all of you, he's just a tall, lanky guy. He's a lanky guy. He's lankier than the most lankiest guys you would come across. And how is a guy like that going to go and rob a bank? Seriously. So I said, Brut, just, daydream about it, fantasize about it or something, but don't go crazy. Okay? Don't go crazy. He was like, no, man, no. I'm going to do it. I have to do it. This is the only thing that I can think of. I've exhausted multiple options in my head, and there's nothing left. And I'm convinced that this is the way to go. And I said, for you to be able to do this by yourself, there's going to be security measures. There are alarms and stuff. And he's like, Bogus, what? A Grameen cooperative bank near my house are now going to have lasers and motion detectors and all that. Come on. I'm just going to go in there and I'm going to do my thing and I'm going to get out. Then I was like, all right, so from my side, if I look at this selfishly, I probably need to keep as much distance from this guy as possible in the forthcoming future. So that's what I did. I said, I wished him good luck. Not really, but just for his reassurance, I said, yeah, good luck. And I broke off all contact, basically, which was a smart thing to do because, they could trace his phone, they could check who he contacted recently and all that. Who wants to get in the middle of all that nonsense? And a few days go by and I get contacted. Well, I try to avoid it, but a couple of cops show up at my door. I was surprised at first because I'd completely forgotten. It was a week or two since I spoke to Brut about this. And they said, are you Bogus? I said, yeah. How do you know? Do you listen to the podcast? They're like, no, you need to come down to the station. We need you to identify someone. And then I knew. I had this deep sinking feeling. So I went along with them, and as you know, the cops, they sometimes have a perp lineup where they ask you to identify who, identify a suspect from a lineup of suspects. And I was looking at these guys, they were all tall and they were all lanky, and they were standing about 6 feet away from me. And the cop was looking at me, waiting for my reaction. Which one of these is Brut? I go, officer, how am I supposed to know that? What do you mean? You worked with this guy for a few years. You've known him for some time. Do you honestly expect me to believe you don't know who this Brut is? If that's his real name. It's not, by the way. But you have to identify him, otherwise you're going to be in trouble. I said, sir, no, you don't understand. Brut is a tall and lanky guy, yes. I mean, as tall. Well, I don't want to build him up too much. He's not that tall. He's taller than your average guy, for sure. But he was also pretty unremarkable in his presence. In the sense, he could still get lost in a crowd in a Chinese village. You know what I'm saying? So if you line him up next to a few other tall, lanky guys, I'm going to have a tough time, even though I've known him for a while. Just because his presence, So then the officer says, that's not my problem, son. You gotta figure it out. So I said, okay, fine. Have them read something out for me. It could be anything, just 5 to 10 words, just a couple of sentences. The most annoying guy is going to be him. He was a bit skeptical. The cop, he said, how do I know you're not just going to save your friend and finger some other guy and let him take the blame? And I thought about it. He had a good point. Although he probably didn't know that. I would have fingered Brut the first opportunity I would have gotten. That didn't come out right. I would have pointed out Brut the first opportunity I had. He didn't know the dynamic that I shared with Brut anyways. So I said, officer, all right, for your reassurance, here's what we're going to do. First, I'm going to, let's do this. You blindfold me, have these guys read out a couple of sentences, and I'm going to point to you who Brut is. And then you shuffle the lineup, and with me still blindfolded, you have them read out the couple of sentences again, and I'm going to point you out Brut again. That seemed to make sense to him. Like, okay, redundancy. So let's do this. And sure enough, the most annoying voice, it was very easy to pick out. And both tries, I had Brut square at the end of my finger. So, boom, he goes to jail. The officer thanks me for my service to the nation because, of course, I'm a model citizen. I'm not going to be swayed by prior friendships or associations. No, this guy tried to rob a bank at the end of the day. Did he have valid reasons to do it? Maybe. But as long as he daydreamed about it and fantasized about it, you write a script about it or something, it's still okay. But you go out there in the real world and you put out your action, then, your actions have consequences. So with Brut in the jail, I came back home and I was following up with the officer because, hey, of course, I have this podcast with Brut and I do need him to, I do need his company for the recordings because that's the ThyGap podcast, it's me and him. So I tried to negotiate that with the officer, okay, hey, there's a portable recorder, I could just get it over here. I could get the 2 mics. We'll just record. It's we used to do it for hours and hours, but now we're aiming to do it within like 30 to 35 minutes, at the max 40 minutes, but not more than that, because audience feedback. And the officer was not really game for that, unfortunately. So I said, all right. So I don't see any other option but for me to go solo. And until Brut is released, I'll keep in touch and I'll check with you how he is coming along. Please let me know if anything untoward happens, because with Brut, something untoward is bound to happen. So, saying that, I came back home and I continued my COVID lockdown existence, back to the drudgery of just stagnating, basically, in your home. And every now and then I keep getting updates from the officer. One day he told me there was a court hearing and the judge was very keen to make an example out of this guy. Not because of the heinousness of the crime or anything, but when Brut chose to represent himself, which was a grave mistake, the judge could not bear more than 2 minutes of his testimony. He was already annoyed, so he really wanted to make an example out of this guy. But then the most remarkable thing happened. The cops, they got together and they used whatever influence they had, really. And they said, Your Honor, please, our police station, the Kukatpalli police station, there's a lot of hoodlums and there's a lot of undesirable elements that keep coming in and going out of our station. They come in, they get released on bail, and they go and do the same thing again. It's very hard for us to, get anything of value out of these guys. Doesn't matter if we give them the 2nd degree or the 3rd degree in the jail, or even the 4th degree. It just doesn't come out because they're not in there for longer. And what we found with this guy, pointing to Brut, all we had to do was we just ask him to, narrate a few of his jokes, and I'm using air quotes because that's what the officer did, basically. So I'm trying to narrate this story as accurately as I can, as it happened to you guys. So, quote unquote jokes at these guys, and then of course that was a mild annoyance. But when we married our 3rd degree along with Brut going at them verbally, the combination of the physical and the psychological was a challenge too challenging for them to withstand, and they really crumbled. Oh, they crumbled quick. And so the cops were really keen on keeping Brut down in the station because they found he has some utility. And of course, when Brut is doing this, the cops, not only they use masks, I do want to assure everyone who's listening to this, the sanitation as per in the police station, as per the COVID standards, they're maintaining it very well. There's hand sanitizers everywhere in the station. And even when the cops are giving them the 3rd degree, the lathis are always polished top to bottom with disposable tissue that is dabbed in hand sanitizer first. And the cops are all wearing masks, and they're also wearing silicone earplugs because that's just because Brut is in the same room trying out his jokes on the perpetrators. The perpetrators themselves, well, they not only get a COVID mask, which is for safety, of course, but before the COVID mask goes on, there's a cotton ball which is stuffed into their mouths because that is for soundproofing. You don't want these guys yelling too loudly when, the 3rd degree is going on. So that way you protect the sound levels, and you also protect any moisture, elements of moisture that are dangerous for infection. And so not only does the mask protect them from any suspended particles that carry the virus, but also the cotton balls in their mouths could then also serve to absorb any extra particulate matter that is floating around. So it's a very well thought out operation, and I was quite surprised. I requested that I be part of this psychological, physical torture session because I just wanted to see how they went about it, how they discovered this utility of Brut, And unfortunately, it couldn't be done because they didn't have an extra pair of silicone earplugs. And they asked if I'd be okay with that, because I do have a podcast with Brut. And I said, hell no. No way. I'm not okay with that. So that's why I missed out on a first-hand experience. But then after the session is done and after Brut's thrown back into his cell, they do give Brut the usual second, third degree sometimes because, he does test your patience. And, I don't really blame the law enforcement for that. But one thing I will say is because they are in close contact with these undesirable elements of society day in, day out, they have a slightly higher level of tolerance that normal people like the everyday people like you or me may have. And so they were able to take Brut, without much damage for longer than any of us probably would. And I was surprised. And I tip my hat to those guys, for their service and for their diligence in keeping our streets clean. Well, so that's the long and short of it. Brut is cooling his heels in a Kukatpally jail. There's no word out as yet as to when he would be released. I was given assurance that there'd be no chance in hell of recording a podcast with him as long as he's in there. And so, I'm beginning to suspect. I'm just beginning to suspect if they are the ones who are prolonging his stay over there now because they see his utility, His utility is like using cobra venom for a snake bite to make it act as an anti-venom, His utility is like the Gandhian slap, which is, you slap me on my left cheek, I'm going to turn my other cheek, but you're still going to slap me, aren't you? That's Brut. Well, I have to admit, it has its usefulness. It has its utility in places, but in small doses. And that's actually one of the other reasons why we resolved to keep the episode length down to about 30 to 35 minutes. At the max, like 40 minutes. Well, just so we don't repel too many of you out there, and you keep tuning in and listening to the ThyGap podcast, of course, the most unappreciated, underrated, unheard of podcast in the world. We're at the bottom of the list and we make everyone else look good as far as vision statements go. But that's a mission statement more, rather. So as far as mission statements go, I don't think you can land on a better one than that. So I feel good. I feel a weight off my shoulders, off my chest, and off my kidney by being so frank and open with you guys about what really happened. A lot has happened in the recent past, and I've been very busy to and fro from my home and the station, and I got to know the cop really well. I think a few more weeks of Brut stay in the jail, I might even start calling the cop my friend. He seems a sensible guy. He seems to be a resourceful guy. Anyone else would have let Brut go to a prison and rot there, but someone who knows how to make use of things around him, you got to give credit to that, And if Brut's stay extends any longer, well, if it really extends much longer, I might actually invite the cop to join me for the ThyGap podcast as my co-host because, there could be potential there. Who knows? Well, I do hope Brut is released soon and that he can come back and join me on this podcast episode. I'm not sure how much longer that's going to be. What did you guys think? What did you guys think of the story of how all these things that played out? I never imagined that I'd be experiencing any of this, when I started the podcast with Brut. But that's how it goes. That's how it went. So, what do you guys think about the solo episode, the first solo episode, of the ThyGap podcast? Not sure how many more there will be. Something might happen to me in the near future. And you might see Brut doing a solo episode when that happens. And I really sympathize with you in advance for whenever that time comes. Oh, I could go on all day about Brut, but we are hitting the 35-minute mark right now. And just to keep our word with you, dear listeners, I'm going to start winding this up, winding it down. Join us next Thursday for another episode of the ThyGap podcast. And really keep a lookout for every Thursday. Follow us on Spotify, follow us on Google Podcasts. What I've noticed is Google Podcasts is the only one that notifies you whenever there's a new episode. So if you want to rely on that notification, then I would say subscribe or follow us on Google Podcasts. I don't have an iPhone, so I'm not really sure if Apple Podcasts pushes a notification to your screen whenever there's a new episode or not. So I can't really comment on that. But if you're on an iPhone, obviously you can follow us on Apple Podcasts as well. And as always, we would be very happy to hear from you. Let us know if you have any ideas or if you want us to talk about certain topics. Of course, you can go back to our season 1 roster. You can see what kind of topics we touched upon and what kind of things we have talked about. More or less, Brut and I like to talk about things that we ourselves observe, things that go unsaid for the most part, and things that get lost in translation, and all people are left with, or all we're left with, are cliched statements like, early bird gets the worm, or, well, fuck me, I'm not able to think of anything now in this moment, but you know what I mean. These motivational statements, they tend to say a lot, but there's always something that's unsaid, and there's always something unspoken that always gets lost in translation. And even if someone were to try and apply themselves to execute along those lines, they would only find out after stumbling or losing. And there's an even smaller percentage that actually introspects after stumbling and finds the actual formula. But again, a big chunk of those people who stumble, they probably just resolve to themselves that, this is just another marketing gimmick. There's nothing to this. So they just don't try again. So that's about it. You can look forward to more of the same, I guess. I don't know. I don't want to say the same, but if you look at our season 1 roster, the kind of topics we touched upon in season 2 as well, we might want to continue on those or touch upon on similar topics. There was one that we really wanted to talk about, which is the difference between loneliness and solitude. And is there really strength in solitude? I'm sure Brut is going to find out as he's rotting in a Kukatpally jail. All right, so until the next week, dear listeners, ThyGap, subscribe and share. And share. Hey, thanks for listening. You can follow this podcast on Spotify to get notified of new episodes every Thursday. We're also on Apple Podcasts for those of you who have partaken in the forbidden fruit. If you liked what you heard, leave us a 5-star rating and a comment. Say anything like the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. A rating and a comment really helps us out. It's free, and I'm told that's a great price. But enough about us, huh? Tell us about yourself. Leave us a comment. Our Twitter is @ThyGap and we are _ThyGap on Instagram.